Hi there, welcome to Mansfield today on a Monday, and time to call on the brain power of our business consultant, Chris Gibbons, to kick off the week.
Yes, good morning, Jeremy. And I don't need to say much more than Jacob Zuma and the nuclear deal that didn't happen for you to know where I'm heading. Our special guest today is investigative journalist Karen Maughan, who, along with a colleague, Kirsten Pearson, has just published a gripping new book on the subject called Nuclear: Inside South Africa's Secret Deal. She joins us now. Karen Maughan, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. All of this starts, Karen, with a trip by Jacob Zuma to Russia in August of 2014, according to Zuma, to seek treatment for being poisoned, although the Russians didn't report it that way at the time, followed 2 weeks later by the signing of a deal committing South Africa to buy 9.6 gigawatts of nuclear power from Russia. You make the elegant point that had the deal gone through, it would have been highly toxic. We'll come to that in a moment. First question, was Zuma genuinely poisoned, do you think?
Well, it's interesting and important to note that when the National Prosecuting Authority made a determination on whether anyone should face charges for the alleged attempted murder of Jacob Zuma, it could find no evidence that he had in fact been poisoned. Certainly, there was no medical evidence to speak of. When he has spoken about this alleged poisoning, he has claimed that he was poisoned with 3 poisons. This is what he says he was told by Russian doctors, which would have killed anyone else. So, he has constructed this very much as him miraculously having survived a potentially very deadly plot. But certainly from the point of view of the NPA, there is no medical evidence of it. And when this case was put together, he himself never put a statement or gave a statement to the authorities about the poisoning that he alleged he had been victim to. What is, of course, important is who he believed was behind that. And what we expose in the book is that it was Jacob Zuma's apparently firmly held belief that the CIA had attempted to kill him. And that belief, we argue, is what sort of formed the basis, in part, I would argue, of this incredible drive to conclude a nuclear deal, a conclusive commercial agreement with Russia for the procurement of 9.6 gigawatts of nuclear energy at pretty much every kind of cost imaginable for South Africa.
He did go to Russia, to Moscow. He did meet with his friend, his own description, his friend Vladimir Putin. 2 weeks later, there was then Energy Minister Tina Joemat-Pettersson signing off on this trillion-rand deal. The link is, it's too close.
Well, obviously, and then we see the conduct that happens after the agreement is signed, where anyone who raises any objection, for instance, from National Treasury and says, look, how are we going to fund this? Where's our funding model? Like, what are the implications for electricity tariffs and ordinary South African people, is not seen as being a valid critic of, a process that needs to be scrutinized in full. Otherwise, as Pravin Gordhan said in 2013, and I'm paraphrasing by Longisa Pozile's evidence, it would make the arms deal look like a quote unquote Sunday picnic. And they are then cast as potentially part of some kind of murderous and nefarious plot by the West against Jacob Zuma. And we see, in 2016, Pravin Gordhan getting removed off the back of a so-called fake intelligence report that implicated him in economic treason with the West. So this poisoning incident sort of seems to, is an obvious push for Jacob Zuma to conclude that deal, which had been in the offing for some years before it was finally concluded. And it's done in ways that, ultimately the Western Cape High Court find were thoroughly unlawful and under terms that would have, for instance, immunized Russia from any kind of civil liability if, for example, there had been a nuclear accident in South Africa. Russia would have had absolutely no liability of any kind for such an accident.
All along, one very big roadblock kept getting in the way: Department of National Treasury, which refused all along to play ball. Something of a miracle, as Chief Justice Zondo remarked in his recent report.
Yes, and I mean, I think what's very important, if we read the new report that's come out, report 4 of Zondo's commission, he makes it apparent that there was a very concerted plot to capture national treasury. And he makes the remark that had Des van Rooyen, not been removed after those 4 days in office, and had Jacob Zuma not lost power, in that 2017 ANC elective conference, the consequences for South Africa could have been potentially devastating. And he said, he would shudder to imagine what South Africa would look like if someone like Des van Rooyen had remained at the helm of National Treasury. Miraculously, Treasury withstands those attacks, which come in multiple different forms: counterintelligence attacks, attempts to take their ability to control the budget out of their hands. And then, of course, these quick in succession removals of finance ministers over a very short period of time. But ultimately, Treasury withstanding that, but that kind of rhetoric of, being infiltrated by apartheid spies, et cetera, is something which continues to dominate the rhetoric of those aligned to Jacob Zuma and his particular political vision, and their enemies, aka Pravin Gordhan and Nhlanhla Nene and others. So those attacks continue even today.
I'll come to whether it could reappear in some or other form later on, Karen. The deal, as we stand at the moment, dead in the water. But let's not forget that Eskom was also dragged into this. The Guptas, the state capture team, Brian Molefe, Anuj Singh, Marcella Coco. And again, all this is exposed by Zondo.
Yes, I mean, in 2015, and he's remarked on this, it's an extensive part of his report now. In March 2015, we saw this extraordinary series of events play out where Jacob Zuma, aided by Dudu Myeni, the SAA board chairperson, who is herself thoroughly implicated in state capture, remove 4 of the Eskom executive for no other reason than to facilitate a so-called independent investigation, where there appears to be absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing against them. 3 of those people are then kept out. All of them would have been key, potential barriers to a nuclear deal, a more substantive commercial arrangement with Russia. But only one comes back, Marcella Coco, who is then risen through the ranks of Eskom to become, as we are able to show through minutes and recordings of board meetings, one of the key drivers of the state capture project and, of course, of the Russian nuclear deal. Because at some point, the Russia-South Africa nuclear deal and the state capture project collide intensely. And I would argue that, the Russian nuclear deal was in many respects the ultimate manifestation of state capture. It was the ultimate attempted act of state capture, because had it succeeded, not only would the Guptas have benefited through Shiva uranium, which they bought in 2010, at the time that South Africa joined BRICS and put the lines in place to do this deal with Russia, but we would have also seen a situation where South Africa would have been dependent on Russia for 23% of its energy, in a manner that would have essentially made us geopolitically far more aligned than we are already with Russia, which is profound if we see our attitude to the Ukraine crisis, but in a way that would have made it almost impossible for us to object or protest to any of the kind of policy decisions that they may have made. And that, I would argue, would have been the ultimate form of capture that could potentially have led to South Africa being a de facto Russian colony.
Well, then let's bring it to the present. Nearly 4 years after Cyril Ramaphosa replaces Jacob Zuma, has the nuclear deal really gone away?
No, it hasn't. And, there has been these repeated sort of rhetoric from Gwede Mantashe, the mineral energy minister, saying that, nuclear is really a viable energy solution for South Africa. There's now talk of a 2.5 gigawatt deal. There have been talk of modular reactors, which, of course, are one of the, the forms of nuclear energy that Rosatom specialize in. So it hasn't been taken off the table. Eskom currently is engaged in an environmental assessment process, which is very likely to end up in court entasement in the Eastern Cape for the potential build of a nuclear reactor. But what is pivotal to remember, and Eskom has said this to us in the book, Andre de Ruyter, is that they simply don't have the money for nuclear. It is not something that is commercially viable for South Africa at the moment. And certainly in terms of the modular reactors, de Ruyter's response is that that is not proven technology. There's no sense in which that could be a potentially viable, sustainable form of energy for South Africa. And what is very obvious is that if there is an attempt to procure nuclear into the future, as we've said before, with the Earth Life Africa, litigation that so successfully overturned the Russia-South Africa IGA intergovernmental agreement, it is very likely that these matters are going to end up in court again. And that's what makes these current attacks on the judiciary, on constitutionalism and rule of law so pivotal, because the courts have consistently been the barrier that has stood in the way of these kind of unlawful and nefarious agreements that have such profound economic implications. And if they are undermined in the way that they are being right now, the consequences could be potentially devastating.
Very worrying indeed. Karen Maughan, thank you for joining us. Jeremy, once again, the book is Nuclear: Inside South Africa's Secret Deal by Karen Maughan and Kirsten Peterson, and published by Tafelberg.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much, Chris. Absolutely fascinating and, to say the least, a little bit hair-raising. But we'll continue tracking that particular story because it's not yet closed. Chris Gibbons, once again, thank you very much for your input into Mansfield today. That was the business section of it. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at legal matters. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.